My mentally unstable brother ambushed my husband and gave him a black eye. That's how I found out. He had discovered the disgusting secret my husband kept hidden from me for years. My twin brother has always been the wild card of our family. I remember being 16 when he tried to peer pressure me into stealing our parents' liquor and getting drunk together. I declined, and when I came back to the kitchen an hour later, I saw him stumbling all over the place, barely able to stand still. I fed him some bread and water and hoped this was a one-time moment of teenage rebellion, but it wasn't. He continued to drink himself dry, and it even got to the point where I noticed him bringing in a flask into school. I thought it would be easy to talk to him, that all I had to do was let him know he was acting like an R-word and would have no future, but it wasn't. That's when he threw his water bottle at me. It was hard, threatening. Nancy, get the EF out. So by the time he barely made it to graduation, he was a full-blown alcoholic. Coffee every morning that was 80% vodka, a few bottles of Budweiser every night that he kept under his bed. And I didn't even have to tell my parents, because he made it so obvious that they found out themselves. As my dad threw all his shut into a bin bag, Brian's whole stature changed. He went from having a boyish smirk on his face and pretending like he didn't care, to being filled with rage. I just stood frozen in the doorframe, wanting to see what was happening but not wanting to get hurt. Suddenly, Brian clocked him. "I'm so sorry," he immediately yelled, looking down at his hands like he was scared of what he was capable of. Tears were streaming down his face. My dad hugged him and promised that we were there for him, that he would pay for him to go to rehab. Fast forward 10 years, and Brian seemed like he got his life together. By this point, he had a daughter and wife. We were all extremely proud of him. Meanwhile, I had a husband that I loved. Luckily, his mom was an abusive alcoholic, so he was fully trained on how to deal with one. So when we went to my parents' house for Thanksgiving, everything was going smoothly at first. We honestly looked like the white picket fence family everyone always talks about. I was downstairs with my dad cooking up a steak when I heard a yell from upstairs. I sprinted so fast I almost tripped over, and that's when I saw Brian had given my husband a black eye right outside the bathroom door, just like the one he had given my dad all those years ago. "Get the F away from her," Brian yelled. A wave of shock ran through me, and I slapped Brian. My husband, being too nice to hit Brian back, settled for leaving with me. I didn't know what had happened, but I wasn't sticking around to find out, because if Brian had started drinking again, there was no way I'd allow my pregnant self to be anywhere near him. I expected everyone to be angry on my behalf, but from skimming the message notifications, it was clear everyone jumped on the hating my husband bandwagon. It felt like everyone had lost their minds, and I guess my husband noticed my discomfort, because he took my phone and told me to just relax for the evening. He even deleted all the texts I had received. He really seemed perfect. That's when things took a turn. The next day, I went to call Brian, mainly to encourage him to return to rehab. But as soon as the phone started ringing, my husband slapped it out of my hand. "Why the F are you talking to a man that assaulted me?" If I was any other woman or a younger version of myself, maybe his manipulation would have worked, but even I knew that slapping a phone out of my hand was crazy. I had every right to talk to my family. "Brian never should have hit you, and I'll never forgive him for it, but I need to make sure he's getting help. I didn't realize I married someone who sides with abusers." He cut me off. I immediately switched my face into a fake moment of realization. "Oh my gosh, I don't know what I was thinking. I'm sorry, baby." He nodded before saying "good girl" and walking away. That's when I got in my car, drove to the park, and called Brian, because now I was more suspicious of my husband than ever. He picked up straight away. "Lauren, I need you to trust me and drive over here right now." His voice was urgent, and I knew that no matter what, Brian would never lay his hands on me, so I drove. When I got there, my dad couldn't even make eye contact with me, and my mom was in his arms, silently sobbing. Brian gently pulled me into the room next door. "Lauren," his tone was rarely ever serious, so I knew this was bad. "I want your husband dead." His voice was cold, unforgiving. I narrowed my eyes at him and started debating whether I should slap him again, until he finally spit out an explanation that made me want him dead too. When he was outside the bathroom door, my daughter was inside. I saw it, Lauren. His hands were in his pants. He was kneeling down to the peephole with a smile on his face that I never want to see again. I swallowed the bile that rose in my throat. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. My first reaction was pure disbelief. Mark? My husband? The man I was having a baby with? No way. But the look on Brian's face was deadly serious. I'd seen him hammered. I'd seen him angry, but I'd never seen him like this. Cold and calculated. "Are you absolutely sure?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "Maybe you misunderstood what you saw." Brian shook his head firmly. "I know what I saw, Lauren. I wish I didn't, but I do." I sat down on the couch, feeling like my legs might give out. My mom came in and sat beside me, putting her arm around my shoulders. She didn't say anything, just held me. My dad stayed in the doorway, his face ashen. "What do we do?" I finally asked. "Don't confront him," Brian said immediately. "Not yet. We need to be smart about this." I nodded slowly, trying to process everything. Part of me wanted to call Mark right away and scream at him, demand answers, but another part of me was terrified of what might happen if I did. I was pregnant with his child. I was vulnerable. "I need to go home and think," I said, standing up. "He'll get suspicious if I'm gone too long." My mom squeezed my hand. "You don't have to go back there, honey." But I knew I did. I needed to figure out if what Brian said was true, and if it was, I needed to protect myself and my baby. I drove home in a daze, rehearsing how I would act normal around Mark. When I got home, he was waiting for me in the living room, pacing back and forth. "Where were you?" he demanded. "Just driving around." I lied. I needed to clear my head after everything that happened. He seemed to accept this, but I noticed how his eyes followed me as I moved around the house. Had they always done that? Had I just never noticed before? That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay awake watching Mark's chest rise and fall, wondering who this man really was. The next morning, I called in sick to work. As soon as Mark left for his job, I started searching through our house. I didn't know what I was looking for exactly, but I knew I needed to find something. I checked his desk drawers first, then moved to his closet. Nothing seemed out of place. Then I remembered his laptop. Mark always kept it password protected, claiming it had sensitive work documents. I'd never questioned it before. I tried a few passwords I thought he might use. Nothing worked. I was about to give up when I remembered the flash drive he always kept on his keychain. He'd told me it was a backup for work, but maybe it had something else on it. I found his spare keys and removed the flash drive. When I plugged it into my own laptop, my hands were shaking so badly I could barely use the mouse. The drive opened to reveal a folder labeled Work Backups. Inside were dozens of subfolders with dates. I clicked on the most recent one. What I saw made me run to the bathroom and throw up. Pictures. So many pictures. Not just of Brian's daughter, but other children too. Neighborhood kids, kids from the park, all taken without anyone knowing. Some through windows, some at public places. None of them were naked, thank God, but they were clearly taken by someone with bad intentions. I closed the laptop and sat on the bathroom floor, crying. Brian was right. My husband was a monster, and I was carrying his child. I called Brian immediately. I found something, I said, my voice breaking. You were right. I'm coming over, he said without hesitation. 20 minutes later, Brian was at my house. I showed him what I'd found on the flash drive. His face hardened as he scrolled through the images. We need to go to the police, he said. I nodded, but then froze as I heard the garage door opening. Mark was home early. I panicked and quickly closed the laptop. Brian grabbed the flash drive and shoved it in his pocket just as Mark walked through the door. I tried to look normal, but my heart was pounding so hard I thought it might burst out of my chest. My hands were trembling, and I could feel beads of sweat forming on my forehead despite the cool air conditioning. What are you doing here? Mark asked Brian, his voice cold and sharp like a blade of ice. Brian stood up, putting himself between Mark and me, his shoulders tensed, a protective barrier I'd come to rely on more than I ever expected. Just checking on my sister. After what happened, I wanted to make sure she was okay. Mark's eyes narrowed, dark and calculating. The warmth that had once made me fall in love with him was completely absent now. You should leave, he said, each word deliberate and threatening. I was just going, Brian said. He gave me a meaningful look, one that carried the weight of our terrible discovery. Call me later, sis. After Brian left, Mark turned to me, his gaze scrutinizing every inch of my face. Why was he really here? I forced a smile, hoping he couldn't hear the thundering of my heart. Like he said, just checking on me. I wasn't feeling well this morning. I placed a protective hand over my slightly swollen belly, using my pregnancy as a shield. Mark seemed to buy it, but I noticed how he scanned the room, like he was checking if anything was out of place. His eyes lingered on the laptop for a second too long. He walked over to his desk and opened the drawer where he usually kept his keys. My heart skipped a hit. Have you seen my spare keys? He asked casually, though there was an undercurrent of suspicion in his voice. No, I lied, the word bitter on my tongue. Maybe check the kitchen? He nodded and went to look. I quickly texted Brian. He knows something's up. What do we do now? Brian replied immediately. Don't confront him. Act normal. We need more evidence before going to the police. More evidence? What we had was already damning. The images on that flash drive had made me physically ill. Children. So many children. In situations no child should ever be in. But I understood what Brian meant. We needed to be careful. Mark was smart, and if he suspected I knew anything, who knows what he might do. For the next few days, I played the role of the perfect wife. I cooked Mark's favorite meals, laughed at his jokes, and pretended everything was normal. I wore makeup to hide the dark circles under my eyes from sleepless nights. I made excuses about pregnancy fatigue when he wanted intimacy. But inside, I was dying. Every time he touched me, I had to fight the urge to recoil. Every time he talked about the baby, I felt sick thinking about what kind of father he would be. Meanwhile, Brian was busy gathering information. He called me when Mark was at work to update me. He'd spoken to some of our neighbors, asking casual questions about Mark. One mom, Jessica, mentioned that Mark had offered to babysit her 8-year-old daughter several times, which she thought was odd but nice. Another neighbor, Ryan, said Mark often volunteered to take photos at neighborhood events where kids were present. Ryan had even commented once that Mark seemed to focus his camera more on the children than the adults. We need to check his computer, Ryan said, his voice tight with urgency. The flash drive is probably just the tip of the iceberg. But Mark never left his laptop unattended. He took it to work with him every day, and when he was home, it was either with him or locked in his office. I needed to find a way to get access. I considered drugging his evening whiskey but feared what might happen if he caught me. My opportunity came a week later. Mark got a call from his boss asking him to come in on Saturday for an emergency meeting. He was annoyed but couldn't say no. As soon as he left, I called Brian, my fingers shaking as I dialed. He's gone for at least 3 hours, I said, but his office is locked and I don't have a key. I'll be right over, Brian replied, determination evident in his voice. When Brian arrived, he brought a small toolkit with him. His eyes were serious, focused. I learned a few things in my wild days, he explained as he worked on the office door lock. It took him about 10 minutes, but he got it open. Mark's office was meticulously organized, almost obsessively so. Every pen aligned, every paper stacked perfectly. His laptop was gone. He'd taken it with him. But there was a desktop computer that I rarely saw him use. It was password protected too. Let me try something, Brian said, sitting down at the desk. He tried a few common passwords before looking up at me. What's your anniversary date? I told him, and he typed it in. Nothing. Then he tried my birthday. Still nothing. What about the baby's due date? He suggested. I gave him the date, and to my surprise, the computer unlocked. My heart sank. Even his password was about accessing children. The thought made bile rise in my throat. Brian started searching through the files while I kept watch at the window, terrified Mark might come home early. The sky outside was gray and threatening rain, matching my mood. What Brian found made my blood run cold. Hidden folders with more pictures, some even worse than what was on the flash drive. There were also chat logs where Mark had been talking to other men with the same interests. They shared tips on how to gain trust. how to get access to children. Reading over Brian's shoulder, I had to rush to the bathroom to throw up. We need to copy all of this, Brian said, plugging in a portable hard drive he'd brought with him. His face was ashen, his jaw clenched tight. While the files were copying, I searched through Mark's desk drawers. In the back of the bottom drawer, I found a small notebook bound in black leather. Inside were names and addresses of families with young children, including some from our neighborhood. Next to some names were stars or check marks. Jessica's daughter had 3 stars. I showed it to Brian, who looked like he might be sick. Lauren, we need to go to the police with this, he said. Today. I nodded, but then froze as I heard a car door slam outside. I ran to the window and saw Mark walking up the driveway, his stride purposeful. The meeting must have ended early. He's back, I whispered urgently, panic clawing at my chest. Brian quickly unplugged the hard drive. The file transfer wasn't complete. We have to go now, he said, grabbing the notebook and shoving it into his pocket along with the hard drive. We rushed out of the office, locking the door behind us. Brian barely had time to hide in the guest bathroom before Mark walked in the front door. I stood in the hallway trying to look casual, though my heart was racing so fast I felt lightheaded. Meeting got canceled, Mark announced. Then he looked at me suspiciously. Why are you so flushed? Just doing some cleaning, I said, gesturing to the duster I'd grabbed from the hall closet. The pregnancy makes me overheat easily. I fanned myself for effect, praying he wouldn't notice how my hands trembled. Mark seemed to accept this and went to the kitchen for a drink. I texted Brian, stay hidden. I'll create a distraction so you can leave. I went to the kitchen and deliberately dropped a glass on the floor. As it shattered, I called out, oh no, Mark, can you help me clean this up? I don't want to cut myself. While Mark was busy with the glass, carefully picking up each shard, Brian slipped out the front door. I breathed a sigh of relief, but my heart was still racing. We had evidence now, but not everything, and Mark was getting suspicious. I could see it in the way his eyes followed me, the way he checked his office door twice that evening. That night, Mark was unusually attentive. He insisted on making dinner, massaged my feet, and kept asking if I was feeling okay. On the surface, it seemed sweet, but there was something off about it. His eyes were too watchful, his questions too probing, his touch lingered too long, as if he was trying to reclaim ownership. When we went to bed, I pretended to fall asleep quickly, but I lay awake for hours, listening to Mark's breathing, wondering if he knew what Brian and I had discovered. The moonlight cast eerie shadows across our bedroom, making ordinary objects look sinister. Around 2 a.m., I felt him get out of bed. Through barely open eyes, I watched him go to his office. He was in there for almost an hour before coming back to bed. I remained perfectly still as he slid under the covers, afraid that even the slightest movement would give me away. The next morning, I checked my phone and found a text from Brian. Meet me at the park at 10. Bring anything important you need. I knew what he meant. It was time for me to leave Mark. I waited until Mark went to shower, then quickly packed a small bag with essentials, clothes, toiletries, important documents, and the ultrasound picture I kept in my nightstand drawer. I also grabbed my grandmother's ring that Mark didn't know about, something I could sell if I needed money. I hid the bag in my car while Mark was getting dressed. I'm going to the grocery store, I told him casually as I grabbed my purse. Need anything specific? He shook his head, but I noticed how his eyes followed me as I grabbed my purse and keys. Don't be too long, he said. It sounded like a warning, not a request. I drove to the park where Brian was waiting with our parents. My mom hugged me tightly, her familiar perfume momentarily comforting me. My dad, usually stoic, had tears in his eyes. He and Brian stood guard, watching for any sign of Mark. We have enough to go to the police, Brian said, showing me the hard drive and notebook. But it's not complete. There's more on his laptop and probably online accounts we don't have access to. I don't care, I said, my voice stronger than I expected. I just want to be done with him. I want a divorce and a restraining order. My parents nodded in agreement. You'll stay with us, my mom said, squeezing my hand. He won't dare come near you there. But as we were talking, my phone buzzed with a text from Mark. Where are you really? The grocery store says they haven't seen you. Come home now or I'll have to come find you. My blood ran cold. He was tracking me somehow. He knows I'm not at the store, I told the others, showing them the text. My hands were shaking so badly I nearly dropped the phone. How could he know that? My dad asked, his face darkening with anger. He must have put a tracking app on my phone, I realized, or maybe my car. Brian immediately took my phone and turned it off. We need to check your car for GPS trackers, he said. We searched my car thoroughly and found a small tracking device magnetically attached under the rear bumper. Brian removed it and threw it in a nearby trash can. I felt violated all over again, knowing Mark had been monitoring my movements. We need to go to the police now, my dad said, before he figures out where we are. We drove to the police station in my parents' car, leaving mine at the park. I was terrified but determined. This had to end. The weight of what we'd discovered, what Mark was capable of, pressed down on me like a physical force. At the station, we spoke to a detective named Pamela Rodriguez. She was a petite woman with sharp eyes that missed nothing. I explained everything, what Brian had seen, what we'd found on the flash drive and desktop, the notebook with children's names. Detective Rodriguez took it all very seriously, her expression growing grimmer with each detail. We'll need to get a warrant to search your house and seize his electronic devices, she explained. In the meantime, I strongly advise you not to return home or contact your husband. I nodded, relieved that she believed us. What about a restraining order? We can start that process today, she assured me. Do you have somewhere safe to stay? She's staying with us, my dad said firmly, his arm protectively around my shoulders. As we were leaving the station, my mom's phone rang. It was our neighbor, Jessica, calling in a panic. There's something wrong at Lauren's house, she said. Mark is throwing things out the window and yelling. Should I call the police? They're already involved, my mom told her. Stay away from the house, Jessica. Mark is dangerous. Detective Rodriguez overheard and immediately dispatched officers to my house. He must have realized you're not coming back, she said grimly. We waited at the station for news, the minutes crawling by like hours. About an hour later, Detective Rodriguez returned. Your husband wasn't at the house when officers arrived, she told me, but it looks like he was destroying evidence. They found smashed hard drives and burned papers. My heart sank. Had we lost our chance to prove what he'd done? Would he somehow escape justice? Don't worry, the detective continued, seeing my expression. We still have what you brought us, and our tech team can recover some data from damaged devices. For the next week, I stayed at my parents' house, jumping at every sound and constantly checking to make sure doors and windows were locked. Mark had disappeared. His phone was off and he hadn't shown up at work. The police were looking for him, but so far, no luck. I had nightmares about him finding me, about what he might do to our baby once she was born. Brian stayed with us too, sleeping on the couch with a baseball bat nearby. He'd become incredibly protective, never letting me go anywhere alone. It reminded me of when we were kids and he'd stand up to bullies for me, despite being smaller than most of them. 10 days after I left Mark, Detective Rodriguez called with an update. We've recovered a significant amount from the devices you provided and what we found at your house, she said. It's extensive. Your husband has been collecting these images for years, long before he met you. I felt sick, but also relieved. The evidence was real and substantial. Mark wouldn't be able to talk his way out of this. He couldn't claim it was a misunderstanding or a one-time mistake. We've also put out an alert for him, she continued. Every police department in the state is looking. But Mark was still in the wind. Days turned into weeks with no sign of him. I started to wonder if he'd fled the country. The restraining order was in place, but a piece of paper wouldn't stop him if he really wanted to find me. I found myself checking under my bed each night, a childhood habit that had suddenly become necessary again. I was nearly 4 months pregnant now, and starting to show. My baby bump was small but unmistakable. Despite everything, I decided to keep the baby. It wasn't this child's fault who their father was. Brian supported my decision, though my parents were more hesitant. What will you tell the baby when they're older? My mom asked gently one evening as we folded laundry together. The truth, eventually, I said, but a version they can understand and that won't hurt them. One evening, about a month after I'd left Mark, I was helping my mom with dinner when the doorbell rang. Brian went to answer it, baseball bat in hand. I heard voices, then Brian called for me. At the door was Ryan, our neighbor from across the street. His normally cheerful face was drawn with concern. I think I saw Mark, he said without preamble. He was sitting in a car down the block from your house. When I walked toward him to check, he drove away. My heart started racing. When was this? About an hour ago, Ryan said. I called the police, but by the time they got there, he was gone. We thanked Ryan for the warning and immediately called Detective Rodriguez. She promised to increase patrols in our neighborhood and reminded us not to approach Mark if we saw him. That night, none of us slept well. Every noise made me jump. The house settling, the wind in the trees, a car passing by. Around 3 a.m., I got up to use the bathroom and noticed a light on downstairs. I found Brian sitting at the kitchen table staring at his phone. Can't sleep? I asked, sitting across from him. He shook his head. I keep thinking about what I'd do if I saw Mark right now. Don't, I said firmly. He's not worth throwing your life away for. Brian looked up at me, his eyes tired but determined. I'd do anything to protect you and that baby, Lauren. Anything. The next day, I had a doctor's appointment for an ultrasound. Brian insisted on coming with me, along with my mom. We were extra cautious, checking for anyone following us and parking close to the entrance. The appointment went well. The baby was healthy, growing right on schedule, and we even found out I was having a girl. Despite everything, I felt a moment of pure joy seeing my daughter on the screen, her tiny hands and feet, the flutter of her heart. It was miraculous. My mom cried, and even Brian got a bit misty-eyed. As we were leaving the hospital, I spotted a familiar car in the parking lot. My heart stopped. That's Mark's car, I whispered to Brian, pointing discreetly. Brian immediately put himself between me and the car, while my mom called Detective Rodriguez. Get back inside, Brian urged, guiding us toward the hospital entrance. But before we could reach it, Mark stepped out from behind a column. He looked terrible, unshaven, clothes rumpled, eyes wild with a desperate intensity that frightened me. Lauren, he called out. I just want to talk. Stay back, Brian warned, stepping forward. The police are on their way. Mark ignored him, his eyes fixed on me. You've ruined everything, he said, his voice eerily calm. I lost my job, my reputation, all because you couldn't mind your own business. You ruined everything yourself, I replied, finding courage I didn't know I had. What you did, what you were going to do, it's unforgivable. Mark's face twisted with anger. You have no idea what I'm capable of, he threatened, taking a step toward us. Brian moved forward to block him. Neither do you, he said coldly. For a tense moment, they stared each other down. Then we heard sirens in the distance. Mark's eyes darted around, calculating. With one last venomous look at me, he turned and ran toward his car. Let him go, I told Brian, who looked ready to chase after him. The police will find him. And they did. Mark only made it about 5 miles before a police roadblock stopped him. He was arrested without incident, though Detective Rodriguez told me later that they found a knife and rope in his car. I tried not to think about what he might have been planning. In the weeks that followed, more evidence came to light. The police found that Mark had been part of an online network of men who shared similar interests. Some of his friends were also arrested. The case against him was airtight. I filed for divorce immediately, citing the criminal charges and requesting that Mark have no rights to our daughter. The judge agreed without hesitation. I changed my name back to my maiden name, wanting nothing to do with Mark's identity anymore. As my pregnancy progressed, I slowly started to heal. Brian was my rock through all of it, attending every doctor's appointment and helping me set up a nursery in my parents' house. He'd been sober for over 10 years now, and watching him support me through this crisis made me realize how far he'd come from that troubled teenager who used to get into fights and drink to numb his pain. I never thought I'd say this, I told him one day as we assembled a crib, the instructions spread out on the floor between us. But I'm glad you punched Mark that day at Thanksgiving. Brian laughed, a genuine sound that had become rare lately. Me too, sis. Me too. Mark eventually accepted a plea deal to avoid a trial. He would serve at least 15 years in prison and be registered as a sex offender for life. When Detective Rodriguez told me the news, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. It wasn't over. I would always have to be vigilant for my daughter's sake, but at least Mark couldn't hurt us anymore. 6 months after leaving Mark, I gave birth to a healthy baby girl. I named her Hope, because despite everything, that's what she represented to me. Brian was the first person to hold hold her after me, and the look of pure love on his face told me she would never lack for protection. As I watched my brother gently rock my daughter, I thought about how life takes unexpected turns. Brian, once the family troublemaker, had become my strongest ally, and Mark, who had seemed so perfect, had hidden the darkest of secrets. "She's beautiful, Lauren," Brian whispered, looking down at Hope's tiny face. "And she's going to be okay. We all are." For the first time in months, I truly believed it. As I watched my brother gently rock my daughter, I felt a strange mix of peace and anxiety. Hope was perfect in every way. 10 little fingers, 10 little toes, and the cutest button nose I'd ever seen. But I couldn't shake the fear that somehow, someday, Mark would find a way back into our lives. "You're thinking about him again, aren't you?" Brian asked, not looking up from Hope's tiny face. I nodded. "I can't help it. What if 15 years isn't enough? What if he gets out early for good behavior or something?" Brian carefully handed Hope back to me. "Then we'll deal with it. But that's a problem for future us. Right now, this little nugget needs her mom to be present." He was right, of course. I needed to focus on the good things in my life, not waste energy worrying about Mark. Still, I made a mental note to talk to my lawyer about what would happen when Mark eventually got released. I wanted to be prepared. The first few months with Hope were a blur of sleepless nights, diaper changes, and figuring out breastfeeding. I stayed at my parents' house, which was both a blessing and a challenge. My mom was amazing with Hope, always willing to take her so I could shower or nap. My dad built a rocking chair for the nursery and spent hours walking Hope around the house when she was fussy. Brian came over almost every day. He'd bring coffee for me and silly little onesies for Hope. His wife Jenny was pregnant now too, and they were having a boy. It was nice to think our kids would grow up as cousins, close in age just like Brian and me. About 6 months after Hope was born, I started looking for my own place. As much as I appreciated my parents, I needed some independence. Brian helped me find a small 2-bedroom house just a few blocks from my parents. It needed some work, but the price was right and the neighborhood was safe. "You sure you want to do this?" Brian asked as we painted the living room a soft yellow. "Mom and Dad love having you there." "I know," I said, carefully edging around the window trim, "but I need to stand on my own 2 feet. Plus, I think Dad's about to lose his mind if he has to watch one more episode of that baby show Hope likes." Brian laughed. "Fair enough, but I'm installing security cameras before you move in. Non-negotiable." I didn't argue. The truth was, I wanted those cameras. Even though Mark was locked up tight, I still sometimes woke up in the middle of the night, heart racing, convinced I'd heard someone trying to get in. My therapist called it hypervigilance, a normal response to trauma. Knowing the house was secure would help me sleep better. The day I moved in, my whole family showed up to help. My dad and Brian handled the furniture while my mom organized the kitchen. Jenny set up Hope's nursery, arranging stuffed animals and hanging the mobile Brian had bought. By evening, the place actually felt like home. That night, after everyone left and Hope was asleep in her crib, I sat on my new couch and looked around. For the first time in over a year, I felt like I was moving forward instead of just reacting to the next crisis. I still had bad days when I'd remember something about Mark and wonder how I could have been so blind, but those days were getting less frequent. A few weeks after moving in, I got a call from Detective Rodriguez. My heart immediately started racing. Had Mark somehow escaped? Was he coming for us? "Don't worry, he's still locked up tight," she said, seeming to read my mind. "I'm actually calling about something else. We found some additional evidence on one of Mark's cloud accounts. There are some files I think you should know about." I met her at the police station the next day. My mom watched Hope so I could focus on whatever Rodriguez needed to show me. I wasn't prepared for what she had. "These are files Mark kept about you," she explained, sliding a folder across the table. "It appears he was planning your relationship from the beginning." I opened the folder with shaking hands. Inside were printouts of social media posts I'd made years ago, before I even met Mark. There were notes about my likes and dislikes, my schedule, even a list of my friends. It was like reading a stalker's handbook, except the stalker had become my husband. "He targeted me?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. Rodriguez nodded. "It looks that way. He created a profile of you, figured out where you'd be likely to meet someone, and then orchestrated what seemed like a chance encounter." I thought back to how Mark and I met, at a coffee shop I frequented. He'd bumped into me, spilling my drink, and insisted on buying me a new one. It had seemed so random, so romantic. Now I knew it was calculated. "Why are you showing me this?" I asked, closing the folder. I couldn't bear to look at it anymore. "2 reasons, Rodriguez said. "First, it strengthens our case if he ever appeals his sentence. Second, I thought you deserved to know the truth. This wasn't your fault, Lauren. You couldn't have known." I nodded, but the knowledge still stung. I'd been chosen, studied, and manipulated by a predator, and I'd fallen for it completely. When I told Brian about the files, he was furious. "That sick bastard," he muttered, pacing around my kitchen. I should have hit him harder when I had the chance. "It wouldn't have changed anything," I said, watching Hope play with her toys on the floor. "And you might have ended up in jail instead of him." Brian stopped pacing and sat down next to me. "You know what's messed up? Part of me is glad this happened." I stared at him. "What?" "Not the Mark being a monster part," he clarified quickly. "But if you hadn't married him, you wouldn't have Hope, and she's pretty awesome." I looked at my daughter, happily banging blocks together on the floor. Brian was right. As terrible as the situation with Mark had been, it had given me hope, and I couldn't regret that. As Hope's first birthday approached, I started feeling more like myself again. I'd gone back to work part-time at the accounting firm where I'd been before my pregnancy. My boss was understanding about my situation and let me work flexible hours. I'd even gone on a couple of casual dates, though nothing serious. I wasn't ready for that yet. The birthday party was small, just family and a couple of friends. Hope was more interested in the wrapping paper than the presents, of course. She'd started walking a few weeks earlier and spent the party toddling from person to person, showing off her new skill. After cake and presents, when Hope was napping and most of the guests had left, Brian pulled me aside. "I've got something for you," he said, handing me a small box. Inside was a key. "What's this for?" I asked. "It's a key to our new cabin," he explained, Jenny and I bought that place up at Lake Meredith. It needs work, but it's got potential. I thought maybe you and Hope could come up sometimes. Get away from everything. I hugged him tight. That sounds perfect. Thank you. The cabin became our weekend retreat. Hope loved playing in the shallow water at the lake's edge, and I loved the peace and quiet. Brian and Jenny came up most weekends too, especially after their son Ethan was born. Watching Hope and Ethan play together, I felt like we were building something good out of all the bad that had happened. About 2 years after Hope was born, I got another call from Detective Rodriguez. This time she had news that made my blood run cold. Mark's been communicating with someone on the outside, she told me. We intercepted some letters. He's been asking about you and Hope. My hand tightened on the phone. Who's he writing to? A former coworker named Douglas. We've already brought him in for questioning. He claims he was just being friendly, but we found evidence he's been driving by your parents' house. I immediately called Brian, who came right over. We decided I'd stay at his place for a few days while the police investigated further. I packed a bag for Hope and myself, hands shaking the whole time. Douglas turned out to be more pathetic than dangerous. He'd idolized Mark at work and couldn't believe the charges against him. Mark had manipulated him, just like he'd manipulated me. The police gave Douglas a stern warning and put him under surveillance. He never came near us again, but the incident shook me. I realized I'd been living in a false sense of security. Mark might be in prison, but he was still trying to reach out, still trying to control my life. I couldn't let that happen. I met with my lawyer the next day and filed for a permanent restraining order that would prevent Mark from contacting me or Hope in any way. No letters, no phone calls, nothing. The judge granted it immediately. I also legally changed Hope's last name to match mine, removing the last trace of Mark from our lives. These steps helped, but I still felt unsettled. What if Mark found someone else to do his dirty work? What if he got out someday and came looking for us? Brian suggested we take a more drastic step. Move, he said simply. Not just to a new house, but to a new state, somewhere Mark wouldn't think to look. The idea was terrifying, but also liberating. A fresh start, somewhere without memories of Mark around every corner. Somewhere Hope could grow up without the shadow of her father's crimes hanging over her. I spent weeks researching options. I needed somewhere with good schools, affordable housing, and job opportunities in my field. I also wanted to be near water. The weekends at the lake had shown me how much Hope and I both loved it. Finally, I settled on a small city in Oregon. It was far from Texas, had a growing economy, and was close to both mountains and the ocean. Best of all, no one there knew our story. We could just be Lauren and Hope, not the wife and daughter of a convicted predator. Telling my parents was hard. My mom cried and my dad got very quiet, which was his way of showing he was upset. But they understood. They even offered to come visit for extended periods, especially during the winter when Oregon would be a nice break from Texas heat. Brian was supportive, but sad. I always thought our kids would grow up together, he said as we packed up my house. They still can, I assured him. We'll visit often, and you guys can come see us. Plus, there's video calls. The day we left was bittersweet. My car was packed with everything Hope and I would need until the moving truck arrived with the rest of our stuff. My family gathered in the driveway for goodbyes. My mom hugged me tight. Call when you get there, no matter what time it is. My dad pressed something into my hand, a new pepper spray for my keychain, just in case, he said gruffly. Brian was the last to say goodbye. He hugged me, then knelt down to Hope's level. You take care of your mom, okay, Squirt? He said, his voice rough with emotion. Hope nodded solemnly. At 3, she didn't really understand what was happening, but she knew it was important. I will, Uncle Brian. As we drove away, I watched my family get smaller in the rearview mirror. I felt a pang of doubt. Was I doing the right thing? But then I looked at Hope, happily playing with her stuffed bunny in her car seat, and knew the answer was yes. The drive to Oregon took several days. We stopped at silly tourist attractions along the way, took pictures at state lines, and stayed in hotels with swimming pools. It felt like an adventure rather than an escape. Our new house was small but perfect. A blue cottage with a fenced yard and a view of mountains in the distance. The neighbors brought over cookies to welcome us, and Hope quickly made friends with the kids next door. I found a job at a local accounting firm, and Hope started preschool. We settled into a routine that felt normal, even happy. I still had security cameras installed and checked the locks twice every night, but those habits felt like prudent caution rather than paralyzing fear. 3 years after our move, I met someone. His name was Joseph, and he was Hope's soccer coach. He was patient and kind, never pushing for more than I was ready to give. When I finally told him about Mark, he listened without judgment, then simply said, "Thank you for trusting me with that." We took things slowly, very slowly. It was almost a year before I let him meet Hope as anything other than her coach. Another 6 months before I let him stay the night. But Joseph never complained. He understood why trust was so difficult for me. On Hope's 7th birthday, Joseph proposed. Not to me, both of us. He got down on one knee in our living room and asked Hope if it would be okay if he married her mom and became her dad. Hope, who had grown to adore him, launched herself into his arms with an enthusiastic yes. Then he turned to me with the ring. I said yes too. We got married in a small ceremony by the ocean. Brian was Joseph's best man, and Hope was my maid of honor. My parents beamed from the front row. As we said our vows, I felt the last pieces of my heart that Mark had damaged finally heal. Life isn't perfect. I still have nightmares sometimes. I still worry about the day Mark will be released, even though it's years away. But those fears no longer control me. I've built a life that's strong enough to withstand them. Hope knows a simplified version of the truth about her biological father, that he did bad things and had to go to prison. Someday, when she's older, I'll tell her more. But for now, she's just a normal kid with friends and hobbies and a stepdad who adores her. As for Brian and me, we're closer than ever despite the distance. We talk almost every day, and our families spend holidays together, alternating between Oregon and Texas. His son Ethan and Hope are thick as thieves, just like Brian and I were at their age. Sometimes I think about how differently things might have turned out if Brian hadn't seen Mark that day at Thanksgiving, if he hadn't trusted his instincts, if he hadn't been brave enough to tell me the truth. I might still be with Mark, unaware of the monster hiding behind his perfect husband facade. Hope might have grown up in danger. Instead, we're safe, we're happy, we're free, and that's worth everything we went through to get here.